Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Super Donkey Kong 99. This is another one of those, of course, bootleg games, and basically it's trying to take Donkey Kong Country and put it on the Sega Genesis. The game features 5 different levels broken up into 2 sections each, and uses designs and levels from both Donkey Kong Country 1 and Donkey Kong Country 3. You can only play as Donkey Kong. It's one-hit death, of course. There is no Diddy Kong involved, though he is in the ending to the game. And the game tries to do its best to replicate the whole feel and platforming action of Donkey Kong, including the barrels and the like, but it's a bit slow, clunky, hit detections all over the place, and has some absolutely awful sound, as you've probably already heard. There's a screaming death sound effect for a lot of the enemies when you jump on their heads in the game, which gets extremely grating and annoying very quickly. In fact, a lot of times I'm trying to avoid killing enemies just so I don't have to hear that. Thankfully, not every enemy in the game has that same sound effect, but a lot of them do. For the most part, this bootleg is just a very simplistic platformer. There are the Kong letters in each of the levels, which is kind of nice, and collecting them will get you an extra life. There's the extra life balloons, though they're oddly colored in this version, as well as there are plenty of barrels for you to jump into. The detection, of course, on the barrels is iffy at best. The worst thing, though, about this particular bootleg is that the platforming isn't anywhere near what you would like it to be. Not only is it, of course, slow and clunky, but there's a lot of times, especially later in the game, where you can easily fall through solid platforms, making especially the very last level a headache to complete. At the end of the level here, we're battling against King Zing, Sting, or whatever his name is, and we're going to be picking up these big barrels in order to throw them at him in order to hit him. When you have a barrel picked up, you have to hold down the button to keep the barrel held in Donkey Kong's hands, as well as you are unable to jump with a barrel in your hand. The game seems to even crawl more so than usual when there's the enemy going on here, as well as us picking up these barrels. He, after getting hit, will kind of go in a wave-like pattern, up and down, slowly going towards you, no matter which side of the screen you're on. So if you go past him halfway through, he will then start chasing you to that other part. It takes a handful of barrels in order to defeat him, but it's a pretty easy boss, and thankfully when he's up in the air, you have a lot of time in order to walk underneath of him safely. The stinger on him won't exactly destroy the barrels when you're holding it over your head, so even though it may look like you're making contact, thankfully you can easily still walk past. After delivering the final hit, Donkey Kong slowly celebrates and we move on to the next level, which is once again based on Donkey Kong Country 3, the warehouse type setting that we are first introduced to in the first world of Donkey Kong Country 3. By far the most annoying thing about this level, though, is the platforms that have the hidden doors or hidden trap doors on them. In Donkey Kong Country 3, these don't really open up, except in one level where you have to work your way all the way to the very top, and then you fall through a series of them all the way to the very bottom of the level where you're able to complete it. In this, though, all of them open when you walk on them, or at least most of them open. There's a few that don't open, weirdly enough, but most of them will immediately open if you step on them, so you want to avoid them by jumping over them all the time. This can be a little bit tricky at points because there are going to be some enemies and the like in the way. In this level is, interestingly enough, the weird little monkey guys that are usually attached to trees or inside of the tree areas that you're exploring that throw the little acorns at you. They're a little bit hard to dodge in this, with the hitbox, of course, being pretty weird. So a lot of times with these guys, I just kind of run past. Wait for them to throw if need be, and then immediately run past them as quickly as I can. The first area is relatively, of course, simple to beat, and then we're moving on to part 2, which is more of the same for the most part. More trapped doors trying to get into our way. In fact, we can use the trapdoor to our advantage there in order to jump on through. The armadillos from Donkey Kong Country 1 are in this, as well as we have these claptrap guys that are going to try to munch on us as we get close. They speed up and kind of charge. Be careful of the jump here that you don't hit your head so you're able to make it to the other platform, along with watching out for these monkeys that are trying to throw their stuff at you pretty much. One problem also with the game is there's no checkpoints throughout the course of the levels, so if you end up dying even at the boss, you do end up having to start back from the very beginning. These barrels here, the ones with the stars on them, usually automatically fire you out in Donkey Kong Country, but in this bootleg game, they are just stagnant, so jump in them and then you can fire yourself out at any point, not having to worry about them spinning or sending you somewhere you don't want to go. The boss for the second world, or whatever you want to call it, is Naughty here, and he just jumps kind of back and forth, whatever direction you're facing. You can kind of get him in a very, very easy pattern, and then just keep jumping on his head to do damage. Really simplistic, and in fact we have a duplicate of this boss later on. The weird thing is, though, when you end up beating him, you're gonna get hit. Like, there's no way seemingly to avoid getting hurt by him when you deliver the final hit. But if that is the final hit on him when you get hit, you, well, complete the level still. Instead of celebrating, you're actually doing the dying animation, which is kind of weird, but it does count as beating the level. Just one of those things, oddities of these bootleg titles. The third world of the game is the industrial style of level that we saw in Donkey Kong Country 1. The opening and closing platforms that get bigger and shorter over and over again are the most annoying problem here, because the hit detection on actually landing on them is quite annoying. A lot of times it'll look like I'm making it and then I ended up falling through. So you want to make sure that it's absolutely where you want it in order to jump on it. Like, you time it perfectly so you don't have to worry about that happening and end up missing your jump. There's also a potential glitch with the boss of the third area, which is against Necky. If you're playing on certain emulators, it will not actually work properly, and Necky doesn't move and won't attack you. Just stand there endlessly until either you kill yourself or just let the game run. So you have to be careful on some of them. So if you end up running into the boss of this world and he's not moving at all and doesn't do anything, doesn't fire any projectiles or whatever, you may end up having to reset the game or try a different means of playing it. So while this game is not great, with the sound design being pretty poor and some of the platforming and all pretty bad, I do appreciate at least the effort of trying to take the sprite work from the brilliantly done Donkey Kong Country games on the Super Nintendo and trying to bring that to the Genesis, of course, you know, with limited sources to do so. And I think they did an okay job at least copying a lot of the animations and getting those things to kind of work. If hit detection and the platforming was better, it actually would be a very fun pirated oddity. But it ends up just being kind of a bit bland, just since it doesn't really capture fully what makes Donkey Kong Country so fun, with the animal buddies and with the extra characters playable and stuff like that, which would have been nice to see implemented in a bootleg version of the game. If there's other Donkey Kong Country bootlegs on Genesis, be sure to let me know about them. I'd love to potentially check them out in the future. So here we go with the Necky fight. Necky will teleport back and forth from the left and right sides, once in a while spitting out a giant nut at you in order to try to hit you. Every time he teleports, this is an opportunity pretty much to jump on his head. If you try to jump on his head too quickly after originally landing on it before he switches, you may end up getting hit because of the poor hit detection. Also, of note is the fact that the right platform, where you can jump on him, sometimes will not detect when you land. So if you jump on Necky and he's a little bit low to the platform, like right on the same level as the platform, I found myself bouncing off of him and sometimes then going through the floor and dying and having to restart the level, which is pretty annoying. After he's defeated, though, we move on to the fourth world of the game and the first of the two temple-themed stages from Donkey Kong Country 1. A lot of the hazards and enemies from that style level are here, but the programmers didn't quite understand slopes very much, so going up and down like stairs or slopes is really, really awkward at times. There's a lot of moving up and down platforms that will kind of go up or down and off screen, so you have to be careful when you time your jumps so that you're able to make it across without accidentally missing a platform and falling down into the pit below. Here we have to deal with a couple of armadillos while waiting for the platforms to kind of line up. We can thankfully make a pretty large jump in order to safely get across without having to waiting for another platform there. You can always tell, of course, how far you're pretty much into each of the levels by which of the Kong letters you've already collected or which ones you've seen thus far. So that's pretty much your best indicator to see how much of the level you have left to go. Be careful on these slopes since it is really slippery. You have to be very careful in order to keep kind of jumping and make sure that you maintain your footing enough in order to get across. Once again, we're going to be waiting for a couple of these up and down moving platforms and then making it over to the far right side. The grabbing of bananas in bunches can also be difficult because sometimes it doesn't like to detect that you're actually grabbing them. But either way, that's the target at the end of the stage, and we move on to level 2 here of the temple-themed levels. Start off with a little bit of a slope and then use that to kind of propel ourselves over to the right side where those cannon-shooting Kremlins is waiting for us. The second level of this temple is pretty much more of the same, where you're going to have moving up and down platforms that you'll have to wait for. There are a few times where you have to use the slopes to your advantage to kind of get enough momentum to get over a couple of the tougher jumps, I guess. But you can also use them to kind of save you on some of these up and down moving platform segments, since you can kind of easily jump back to one of the slopes and wait for another platform to come your way. One of the hardest enemies to deal with are the normal critter Kremlin guys, because when you jump, they usually are going to be ready to jump themselves, since they kind of move back and forth left to right and then jump when they reach the end of their walk cycle, and this usually ends up lining up with right about where you're going to then jump over them when you're kind of just running through the level quickly, so be a little bit cautious when it comes to those guys. As we make it near the end of the level, we're getting ready to face off again with another one of the naughties. I guess this is really naughty, or very naughty. Either way, he will jump back and forth, just like the previous one, and we just jump on his head. The hit detection on the final hit's a little bit different. Sometimes I actually can still get the celebration and not count as a hit against me when I defeat him, and other times I still end up getting hit and dying and doing the death celebration, I guess you could say, before moving on to the next level. Though, very, very easy boss to take care of, and once he's done, we're moving on to the 5th and final world of Super Donkey Kong 99 on the Genesis. The 5th and final world for the game is a snow-themed level based on the levels from Donkey Kong Country 1. This is where the worst of the platforming comes into play, because some of the jumps are really hard to make and time exactly where you need to jump, because you can't really get to the edge sometimes of platforms. It'll kind of glitch out a little bit. Basically, the game is programmed to do the weird animation where Donkey Kong kind of looks into a pin and his eyes bulge out of his head when he does get to the edge of a platform, and this can end up throwing off your kind of momentum when you're kind of running to the edge of a platform to make a long jump. So that comes into play, along with just landing safely on a platform is a big headache when it comes to this final world. There are a few times where we can use barrels to our advantage to kind of go on an angle and be able to kind of ride up the wall or ride up a little bit of a platform to land safely, and there's a few times where that's needed in order to make sure you're able to survive. Nowhere else in the game provided really that big of a challenge until I reached this world, and that's when the kind of manipulating of the platforms and momentum and stuff really had to be at its best if I was going to be able to actually live and keep going through the stage. While Stage 1 kind of prepares you for that, it gets of course a lot more difficult once you make it into Stage 2 of this world. Another weird thing about the game is that the red bugs that you usually use in Donkey Kong Country 3 to kind of get up some of the platforms actually don't end up dying when you bounce off of them, so you can kind of keep jumping on them in order to make it across certain gaps. After some pretty tricky platforming though, we do reach the end of level 1 here, and now we move on to the final level of the game. This level is extremely frustrating because not only is the platforming very hard, like right here we have to use the barrel to kind of blast our way diagonally, and we kind of just barely move up the edge and land safely on that. We'll be doing the same here, where I just land on the platform there diagonally for just a moment, but this allows me to then fall safely down to the lower platform. But what also makes this difficult is the boss itself. You face off against King K. Rool, which makes sense of course, but they did not program him properly. Basically, he moves back and forth and will throw out his crown at you, but the crown's hitbox is not where it is. It appears along the bottom part of the screen, but in fact, it's actually in the center portion of the screen to the higher portion, so you actually don't want to jump at all. Like, normally you would jump over his crown when he throws it to avoid it, but in this game, you don't want to do that, and taking a few attempts to figure that out for the first time while I was playing through, so it got a bit annoying as I was practicing the game. So if you're able to survive, that's the first thing you have to keep in mind, is you have to be able to avoid his attack, since it's not done right at all. The middle portion of this stage isn't too bad, just a few enemies to deal with and not as many of the platforms that we had at the beginning. And then after that halfway point though, that's when things pick up again for the end. You have to do a very nicely timed diagonal shot, and what we'll do is we land on the one platform and then drop down. This is the safest route because trying to get to some of those other platforms is very difficult to do so. After a few more tricky jumps, we're finally getting close to the boss, and here he is, King K. Rool. Like I said before, the hardest thing about him is dodging the crown, because when he throws it, the hit detection for it is above you, so if you jump at the crown, you're going to get hit every time. If you can actually get him stuck in a loop by jumping on his head, and then immediately doing so again before he throws out his crown. Obviously, it takes a little bit of precise timing, but if you're able to do so, you can just keep hitting him over and over again to take him out, and then you get to enjoy the beautiful ending to Super Donkey Kong 99. Isn't it amazing? Have you ever seen anything as majestic as this? Not even a celebration, just a black screen, gray floor. It's just like a permanent purgatory of Diddy and Donkey just standing there. I'm not sure if other versions of this particular bootleg have a better ending or something maybe different, but that's what I've run into every time I've ended up finishing it. So I don't know if it's just broken or maybe this version, that is the ending, which is just absolutely hilarious. But anyway, guys, it's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.